So hi, guys. I'm Sonal Chokshi. I'm from a16z Editorial. I'm here with Parker Conrad from Zenefits. And Zenefits recently went through a couple of regulatory issues in Utah, and we thought it'd be interesting to hear their perspective and also what other startups might be able to take away from that experience. So, Parker, do you want to just kind of give us a really quick summary of like what went down?
Yeah, so basically what happened is Zenefits is a service that sort of helps companies manage all of their HR in sort of one place. So a lot of different specific individual functions like, payroll and medical insurance and commuter benefits and time and attendance software and FSAs and things like that, all through one central system and all online so that you don't have to spend a lot of time running around doing a lot of paperwork and setting people up in all these different places. And one of the sort of interesting wrinkle in our business model is that we give the core system away for free and we make money in a variety of different ways, but one of them is that we act as a broker on companies' lines of health insurance. And in most states, the regulators have said, well, this doesn't look like the kind of thing that we should be getting involved in, and they've taken no action. But in Utah, the insurance commissioner in Utah decided to take action and said that, listen, one of their missions as a DOI was to make sure that there was fair competition between all brokers in the state, and everyone was on a level playing field. And they said that Zenefits' technology actually gave us an unfair advantage in competing for these clients because we made it so easy for companies to get up and running with insurance that it was unfair to other brokers. And so they said that we had to start charging for our service or they were going to start levying some really big fines on Zenefits.
You obviously were probably frustrated and struggling with hearing all that when you started off, but you ended up with a very successful outcome. Like, how did you guys actually get there?
Well, so we were kind of going back and forth with the DOI for several months, before everything kind of blew up. And then, we thought maybe we were going to work it out, that, they weren't really going to sort of do this. It didn't make any sense. And then, they kind of like issued their decision, or they sent us a preview of their decision, and I felt like I'd been punched in the gut because, in starting a company like this, I feel like, I understood sort of like sales, and I understood how to build software and how to build good products and stuff like that. But this was just like a real, something completely out of left field where suddenly there's this like government agency that's like, telling us we're not allowed to operate. And, we're quite a bit bigger now, but at the time, we were really, a small startup, and, it didn't seem like we were doing anything wrong or anything illegal, even, and so it was quite upsetting, or it created quite a lot of anxiety at first, and actually quite a bit of fear, because I thought about it as like, gosh, if you're Uber or Lyft, and like everyone uses Uber, then you have this sort of built-in constituency of people who are using the service, and just like millions of people who want to sort of complain and go to the mat for you and say, this is ridiculous that this service is being banned. But, man, we make HR software that's totally unsexy. There's like no one, like everyone's eyes are going to glaze over, like no one's even going to pay attention to this. They're just these natural constituencies for consumer technology companies because there are so many consumers that are using their service. But for like a B2B SaaS company like us, where we're selling to businesses, there are just fewer constituents that are customers of ours who want the service to be available. And so I was like, maybe we're going to be in really big trouble here because, we're not going to be able to kind of get this done.
So wait, by constituencies, you mean like people that would actually be able to speak up for your product? I mean, not to make it literal, but obviously a lot of people, like in Congress, a lot of people use Lyft and Uber. So if they're not getting access, they're personally inconvenienced. And so is that what you mean by a constituency base? Like people that can...
We were like, who's going to stand up for Zenefits?
Right.
Like, like our consumer base in terms of number of people is much, much, much smaller. And the cause seems like superficially much less sexy because it's HR software instead of Uber, which is much more in the public eye, at least at the time. But one of the things that was really great is we kind of like went to the mat and we sort of started telling people who try to access the service that Utah was blocking us, and created a change.org petition about this issue that went straight to like the governor and the governor's chief of staff and the lieutenant governor and the insurance commissioner and stuff like that. And suddenly there was just this like overwhelming response from lots and lots of people in the tech community, but also just lots and lots of customers that came out of the woodwork and said, gosh, like, we really love Zenefits. We use the software. We had one customer that was a nonprofit. She said they were a nonprofit that used Zenefits to help underprivileged kids apply to college. And she said switching to Zenefits helped them save $300 a month over, sort of who they were using previously. And because of that, they were going to be able to send 2 more kids to college this year. And so there were a lot of interesting stories like that where it was like, gosh, from like a political and like a policy perspective, we were able to say, listen, I understand that brokers are an important constituency for a lot of politicians in the state. In fact, some of the politicians actually are brokers themselves. But there's another side of this argument, which is that Zenefits is able to make life easier and sort of ease the administrative burdens for, millions of small businesses. And that makes a difference too, and that has to be, those sort of impacts have to be weighed against the fact that insurance brokers are losing out and are upset. And luckily for us, that I think there were a lot of people, the governor, the lieutenant governor, and some critical folks in the state legislature who kind of looked at this and said, wait a second, like, this is not what Utah is all about. There were a lot of people in Utah who were saying, hey, this isn't right, and that led a state representative named John Notwell, who kind of said, this is a bad thing for Utah. We need to change this. And so he introduced a bill, like almost immediately. I forget what the technical term is, but he basically, before there was even a language for a bill, he sort of like said, listen, I want to, he kind of reserved a spot for a bill that would, and technically what the bill did is, I think it actually didn't change the law. What it did is it clarified that the existing Utah law never made Zenefits illegal in the first place. So it was a clarification rather than a change to the law, but he sort of announced his intention to do that almost immediately. The lieutenant governor and the governor reached out to us and said they were incredibly supportive, and there was a state senator named Kurt Bramble who was supportive as well, and then we worked with those constituents to sort of get this bill passed. Then it was we had some folks that we hired to kind of help us out on the ground and make introductions so that we could sort of plead our case to, all the various different legislators. And luckily for us, it got passed with sort of overwhelming support.
So I think the bigger picture question is that, it feels like there's like a definite shift in how states have to start thinking about reform and regulation around new technologies. I mean, how did that sort of play into your views of how things played out?
Well, I think what happens is anyone who's trying to build a technology company, almost anyone is going to run up against some kind of incumbent out there in the world who's going to be upset about sort of the ground shifting beneath their feet as a result of this new development. In most cases, in fact, I think if you are growing really quickly and sort of taking over a market or an industry, those existing constituencies are going to seek out some kind of protection from regulators or the government pretty much in every case whenever they can. It's just something they're going to turn to. And one of the challenges is that there are always more entrenched constituencies for the existing way of doing things than there are for something new. One of the great things about Utah is that there is a sort of really nascent and budding tech community there, and Utah cares a lot about trying to develop Salt Lake City as a tech hub. They talk about Silicon Slopes and sort of all of the companies that are out there, and I think a lot of folks. There's a guy named Clint Betts from Beehive Startups and Josh James from Domo and previously from Omnisure, who are really strong and influential members of that community who kind of rallied a lot of those folks, but also sort of reached out to politicians and said, hey guys, like, you guys are talking all the time about how you want to sort of nurture this sort of pro-tech environment in Utah. This is like a great example of a real failure of doing that. And you can't kind of have it both ways. You can't say, listen, we want there to be lots of successful technology companies in Utah, but only as long as they don't tread on the toes of any of these other entrenched interests or any of the existing companies in existing markets out there. Because that's just not the way it works. I think if you're a state out there that is trying to develop tech jobs and technology industry, the best thing that you can do is to sort of shield technology companies from attacks by incumbents through the regulatory authority of the state, and to say, listen, we're going to try and have. I think in general, it's probably a good idea to have a little, only the regulation that's really needed for consumer protection. And if there isn't a real reason from a consumer protection perspective to have regulation, then gosh, it's probably getting in someone's way somewhere who's trying to do something innovative.
So Parker, so what is this? So does this mean that you're done? You don't have to worry about this anymore? And what about other companies who are confronting similar issues with different technologies? Like what would you tell them to do? I mean, what would you do differently, if at all?
I think what I probably would have done differently in the case of Utah is I probably would have, I wish I had realized earlier in the process that we were in sort of a political battle rather than a legal battle with the Department of Insurance. It took us a lot longer than it should to sort of reach outside of the ordinary channels. We were getting an inquiry, we were sending our response, we were getting on the phone with the investigator to go through a demo, and we thought we were sort of following the process. And really, what we should have been doing much earlier on was trying to hire someone who could help us get to the people that were much, much, much more senior in the state government, so that we could sort of plead our case with them and say, hey, here's what's going on, because I think some of the folks on the ground level were a lot more subject to influence by sort of the broker community, and it wasn't really until we sort of broke out of that and were talking with the much more senior folks in the state that they were like, hey, listen, this is not how we want to do business.
Did you change the information that you presented to them? Were you still doing demos, or were you just telling them a bigger story? Or were you doing the exact same thing with a different audience?
It wasn't like we were telling them something different, but we were probably trying to cast it in sort of much broader terms and broader language about Utah and technology and sort of economic development, while it's with the insurance investigator, we were talking much more about the specifics of how our product actually worked. So at the end of the day, it probably was a good thing for us, because the amount of press coverage that we got, in Utah, this was a really big deal. And the amount of press coverage that we got there, now that we're back in the state, we've got tons of companies that are, really interested in hearing more about this service. The other thing that we started doing, very early on in sort of when we were sort of having trouble with Utah, is we started reaching out proactively to all of the insurance departments for every state around the country. And so we're actually, meeting with them at NAIC, which is, the National Association of Insurance Commissioners. They have meetings twice a year. So we go there, for each of those meetings, and we have a room and try and set up meetings to sort of talk people through Zenefits. And so we're doing that twice a year. We're communicating, sending people a lot of information about Zenefits and saying, hey, listen, we're here to answer any questions about our service. Here's what we do. And that's probably helped us head off issues in other states. I'm sure that Utah will not be the last crisis we have like this. But, if you can get out in front of this stuff, you can probably sort of reduce the number that you encounter.
So let's talk about some more takeaways for other startups who are going through the same kind of things. What would you have told Parker a year ago?
So I would say, listen, understand when you're in a political battle versus just sort of a legal dispute. And if you have a political battle, you want to sort of very quickly move outside of just the sort of regular legal framework with this. You want to try and figure out a way to get access to the sort of decision makers and the powers that be at a much more senior level, so that you can plead your case to them. I think you want to identify, who are your constituencies, who are the people that are going to support you. For us, we thought, gosh, there are going to be no constituencies that are going to be supporting Zenefits, because it's HR software and no one cares. But that actually wasn't true. There were three constituencies that we had that were all extremely helpful, and one constituency was the startup community and the technology community in Utah itself. And so there were a bunch of folks that were extremely helpful to us and really cared. This was, I think in part because a lot of them saw that, gosh, maybe someday if they were successful, someone was going to be trying to ban them. And so they responded really well to this. The other natural constituency were our clients. And, as a B2B SaaS company, there are just fewer people that are our clients than there are for like a lot of consumer companies. But as it turns out, I think a lot of the people, like small business owners in our case, like tend to be politically very well connected.
If you're a governor who cares about the technology economic engine of your state, you would care about nurturing that small and medium-sized community for sure.
Exactly. And so when you have, small business owners who, in Utah who have, if you have a company that has, 50 or 100 employees, like that's a pretty big deal. You probably know your local state representative, and he or she's going to pick up the phone when you give them a call. And so, that was actually, the customers were small in number, but incredibly influential. And then the third one in our case was actually a lot of sort of conservative political organizations. There were a lot of, conservative think tanks that were very much supportive of Zenefits. Utah is obviously a very conservative state politically, and so to have conservative think tanks saying, man, Utah really got this one wrong, what's going on here? How are you guys going to fix this? I think that was, particularly for the folks in the government that were predisposed to agree with that, they kind of said, yeah, gosh, we've got to turn this around. This is not what we do in Utah. The great thing about this whole thing is it does feel like, I feel like I really know a bunch of people in Utah now, and so it's been really fun. As part of this whole process, I went and spoke at a Utah tech event and, really got sort of, I thought, a front row seat at what's going on in Utah with technology. It was quite exciting. Met a lot of the key players there. It's also, in Utah specifically, got to meet all the folks in the technology industry, and also got to meet some of the state legislators and, learn a bit about their jobs and what they were up to, and that was a lot of fun. But then also, more nationally, it sort of put us in a position where we're out talking to insurance regulators in all these different states and really sort of establishing a relationship early on with them by having a conversation up front about what we do and why we think that some people might complain, but this is, very much within the law and very much a good thing from a public policy perspective. And so, if you do get complaints, you know where to reach us. Please give us a call so that we can talk through it with you.
Well, thank you, Parker. Really appreciate you taking the time to talk to us about this today. And congratulations, by the way. We love what you guys are doing. We're huge fans.
Okay, cool. Great. Thank you very much.
Bye. Take care.